Thank you very much. Let me go ahead and get a share going. All right, so we would like to welcome you to Human-Centered Agile.
We are the authors of the Human-Centered Agile book. I got my career, I come to this as a user experience professional, someone who's been doing human-centered design for about 20 years. My origin story has to do with starting a record label back in the 90s and having my wife teach me HTML and following that path into wanting to make really good products as a professional, not just my own interests. So that is how I got to be here.
I'm Joe Montalbano. I am a recovering software developer and current Agile coach. I'm a safe contributor. I work as a lead Agile coach at CNO Financial Group, and I want to give a shout out to many of my awesome colleagues that are here on the line. I appreciate your support, and I love working with all of you.
I will take this moment to say we're going to go through this deck a little quicker than we usually do. So please feel free to reach out to us if you have questions, after this presentation. We're happy to hear from you. All right, so in order to understand what we're going to talk about with Human-Centered Agile, we do have to do a little backstory. How did we get here? Why did we even want to write a book about Human-Centered Agile? And the backstory is this. Years and years ago, Joe and I both came from an environment where waterfall delivery was the major way that things got done. Waterfall delivery meant big design up front. It meant a really long runway to delivery. So you could be working on building out a book of requirements for months or even I had seen years. And when you do that, you make a lot of assumptions about what you're going to be building at some future point. Those assumptions turn out to be fragile, whether they're business assumptions, technical assumptions, policy assumptions. The world changes. So what you wrote in 2022 might not be valid to deliver in 2024 for any number of reasons. And that led to lots and lots of shelfware. There was as a designer. So I come to this through design. I come to this, originally through information architecture and interaction design. The one advantage that I had was that there was time built into this process for design and for considering multiple pathways. But there's a problem. What we designed and what ended up being shipped could diverge greatly. And this happened because, on the design side, me and people like me were very interested in how do you build a good experience? How do you build the right experience? We were doing UX things like talking to users and everything else. Then there would be a book of requirements. They would get handed off. And that team was not solving the same problem we were. We will come back to this point. That team was not solving the same problem we were. They were solving the problem of how do we take requirements, get them out the door as efficiently as possible and within our scope of agreement. And when it came time to when an assumption turned out to be wrong, that team was the one to make a course correction to try to figure out how do we handle this piece of technology that didn't work the way that we thought it did? How do we handle it when someone, from a policy side says, oh, no, now we need to do this? And they would go in, they would make a change to the product without necessarily having sort of the big picture of what the outcomes were in mind when they did it. So there are a bunch of challenges that are just germane to Agile. Agile spends a lot of time in the solution space. It is very delivery focused. And what that means for design. So in Waterfall, we had a lot of time to think about what is it that we're trying to make? How do we know if it's any good? Can we show it to users? In Agile, very often you take the first idea, you do a lot of just-in-time design. The idea comes from a product owner. Joe loves to say that it's hard to admit this, but sometimes the product owner does not actually know everything about everything, and they too are learning. Um,
Not any of the product owners that are on the line today, I'm sure.
they do
But
know everything about
they
everything.
do.
But we're all human beings. We can make mistakes, and our users are not us. This is the first lesson that every UX professional learns, is that no matter how well you think you know what you're doing, your user is not you. And you always learn things. Um, and downstream, this sort of it has its own impacts as well. MVPs don't always represent experiments. So if your idea is that you're going to build something small, you're going to get feedback, you're sort of outsourcing your thought about what is good and what is effective to your crowd effectively, and you're going to get feedback. That requires that you come back and repeatedly iterate. Um, it requires that you have MVPs that let you do testing at the right places. And often in practice, MVPs are not that. They are just commitments to a release. They are not like the smallest experiment you can do to learn and course correct. Um, Sometimes one of the problems is that you can actually not iterate from one thing to a whole different thing successfully. Like with an MVP, sometimes the learning should be no, we should not do that. And in practice, that often does not happen. And frankly, if you're relying on your users to tell you when something went wrong, uh, failure can have a bigger cost than the learning value that you've gained. You can lose credibility with people. If you are rolling out a new product or a new feature, you can miss your adoption opportunity because the first time people tried something, it didn't work for them. They're not necessarily going to keep patiently coming back to you and to you until you get it right. It depends on your business. It depends on, how your credibility is built, but different releases have different stakes. We're going to come back to that too.
Again and again. So speaking of failure, what can possibly go wrong? Anybody on the line remember the Juicero? This is a real product, got created. It looks pretty slick to me. I mean, they nailed the design. The idea is that this company wanted to replicate like the K-Cup experience for juice. So they designed this. It's about a $3,000 machine to dispense the juice. And the juice that it dispensed came in these little packages here. And you put the package in the machine, and when you wanted juice, you push the button. And so I don't know about you, but if I had juice in these packages and I wanted to drink it, which I'm not sure I do, I wouldn't need the machine. So this is kind of an example of a product that spent a lot of money, did everything right. It's beautiful design. They didn't solve the right problem. There weren't people that were looking for a $3,000 machine to squeeze juice.
Now, we here today, all of us, are not the first people to notice that this problem is that if you start marching through delivery of something without actually having spent too much time in the problem space or comparing different solutions, that sometimes you can get pretty far off course. And we poke fun at the Juicero, but I think everyone has been at some point part of a feature release or some other product release where it was a fine idea, but it didn't actually solve the problem that people needed. So something got built and delivered that no one actually used because it was sort of aimed in the wrong direction. Design thinking is meant to come in here and solve that problem. This is how a lot of organizations have tried to bake in a little bit more time in the problem space. It's meant to fill in that, like, what is what is it that we should be doing, and what does a good one look like? Basically getting through problem definition all the way through some kind of concept ideation before you really march down the delivery path. That starts the 5 steps. Often now there's a 6th one added called evaluate, but the 5 steps are empathize. You're supposed to go understand your users, define the problem. This is where you get all your parameters from wherever you're getting them. You ideate, you think, you get in a room, you come up with ideas, you make prototypes, you test that prototype. And then once you know you have a good idea, then you start working on the business of actually going into delivery with it. That's the idea behind design thinking. I know I gave it sort of the very Cliff's Notes version, but one of the things it's meant to do is get you through that problem and early concept solution in a cheaper way than building production ready code, which is an expensive proposition. It's an expensive way to test basic ideas and premises.
Hey, Brad mentioned evaluation. I'm just curious, question to all ask yourselves, how many of you today are doing evaluation of work that you've completed and is in production being used by users? Because the pattern that I see a lot of times is that teams will say, wow, we made that release. Aren't we awesome? On to the next thing. And I just want to encourage teams to take a moment and find out if you really scratched your user's itch. Find out, yes, we did the deployment, all the testing was good. What do the users think about it? Are there potentially emerging requirements that are only now being uncovered by your users?
So in this next screen, you'll see what we call the double diamond. There's 100 different versions of the double diamond out there. But it often reflects this idea that what you're doing is the left diamond, the blue one here, could probably be thought of as that sort of problem space, problem definition, ideation space. And once you know what you're building, then you move on into develop and deliver. And so you understand, you spend time in the problem space, then you spend time in the solution space. The problem that we often see with this, and this is very common, there's nothing wrong with the fact that people have evolved this way and are trying to do this. But the problem that we often see, and this is more a problem of outcome than it is intent, is that there ends up being one set of people that are focused on the problem definition and on that solution ideation, and a separate set of people that are focused on the delivery. So what in practice often happens is that you end up with something that ends up looking like a little bit of a mini waterfall. You have, it's smaller, they're easier chunks, but the people doing the thinking about what and the people doing the thinking about how often aren't really very well lined up.
Hey, I see that we've got somebody with their hand up, and I'm happy to take the question now rather than wait until the end if the context is good. Vishal, you have a question?
Yep. Thanks, Joe. In this scenario, we can see that we are segregating the total product development into two major tracks, right? Discovery and delivery. So in the earlier scenario, the Juicero machine, which we saw, that they failed to do the market research for the potential customer base, right? So we often talk these days on LinkedIn and other social media platforms that Agile is dead, Scrum Master role is like going away, who are Agile coaches, and it's project management packed in something else. However, these scenarios where the product failed due to the lack of market research, we don't talk about it much because it is not so evident, or sometimes it is not understood to the common masses or the everybody that, hey, the product actually failed to for fetching the ROI because of the bad market research, because they failed to do the Gemba walks.
So Vishal has just set up the next slides that we're going to do. Vishal, thank you. The check is in the mail. And that was a really good slide 13. We begin talking about that. So
yeah. I will say this, before we do that too much, I want to talk about the fact that one of the themes in our book is that it is not, for example, like a set of market research that comes up with the right product and then hands it off. Like you are absolutely correct that they basically had a failure of discovery. But what we're looking for in the end is to make sure that the people doing the delivery are aligned to the product and the outcomes that you're trying to build, so that at each step along the way, they're empowered to say, this is what will work, this is what will not. There are plenty of times where the early concepts or the first ideas that you have about what the problem are or what a concept solution might be do eventually get upended later for any number of reasons. And so we don't want to just sort of set it to the left side of our process and say, well, market research screwed that up. If they had done a good job, this would be a winning product. We want to make sure that throughout the runway of what we're delivering, we are considering, like, all of these questions that we're about to get to. But that's a great question and a great observation.
We're going to make
So
up some time on the next couple of slides, I think.
there are some problems if you try to bolt these two things together. If you try to sort of bolt that discovery and ideation up front and then do the Agile on the way through, that just come up again and again in practice. And the first is that in design thinking, they call it empathize. I love that Vishal said Gemba walk. Like, he wants people actually out there and interacting with customers or with users. In reality, a lot of times someone will just come in, a business owner will say, I know what my customers want. I know what my customers think. Their idea of empathize gets processed as, I have already heard and I already know. So like, there may not actually be user feedback baked in from the beginning. Another problem is that the lateral thinking, the ideation, the how might we solve this problem gets skipped, and the first clear idea or the highest paid person's opinion or something else drives the bus on what the actual solution is going to be that runs through. And I think we've talked about the rest of this, where, when you separate out the problem of delivering what is agreed upon to deliver is separate from the problem of producing the outcome you want to produce, you end up with a lot of drift and you end up with a lot of compromises that can be really detrimental to experiences. The last one of these, and this is really important, your teams are learning, and their learnings need to travel back upstream. They need to be able to inform strategy. There's no point in having a team learn something, at the end that doesn't sort of come back into the institutional knowledge. And when you do delivery this way, where everything's just sort of shot out of the cannon in one direction, you don't get insights that travel upstream.
So there is good news, and that's that we have common mindsets. You may think that Agile folks and design folks have different mindsets and they want competing things. It's really not the case. So what we want to do with Agile is be able to learn quickly and pivot when necessary, right? We want to iterate and build our products with feedback. And well, the whole point of design thinking is to have a better starting point from the very first iteration, right? To make sure that your efforts reflect the actual needs of your end users. If they reflect the needs of your product owner too, that's good, but we want to make sure that they're aligned. So we want to use human-centered design, a specific implementation of design thinking, to help bridge that gap. So as I just said, HCD is a form of design thinking. Like, think of it as a flavor. Because if you go around and you say, who's heard of design thinking? Well, a lot of people are going to nod. If you ask who has heard of human-centered design, maybe not so many. True story, when I was first asked to introduce or to integrate human-centered design with Agile, it's when I met Brad. We were working with Melinda at the time. And I don't know, I Googled it, what is human-centered design? And I got the description. I'm like, oh, cool. Yeah, we can do that before lunch tomorrow. It'll all be good. We want a particular focused type of design thinking to combine research with design in such a way that the user is in the frame throughout all of our design and development efforts. So what should human-centered design be doing for your Agile team, and how can you tell you're doing it right? Well, Jen Cardello coined this: right problem, right solution, done right. Brad and I liked it. We've kind of borrowed it with attribution. So your HCD should be making sure that you are in fact solving the right problem, that you are building the right solution to solve that problem, and that solution is in fact built right. And kind of each one of these images in the center kind of reminds you that this is done through an interaction with end users, not proxies. All right, so this is what it looks like when you don't solve the right problem. Anybody have this problem at home? Not solving the right problem? How do we solve this in human-centered design? Well, we do exploratory discovery. We want to make sure we find out what's on the minds of our users, and we do problem validation. We validate that we are upfront validating that we're solving the right problem. We're not waiting until we've built some production ready code to find out that we're solving the wrong problem. We're doing that up front. What does it look like if you don't build the right solution? Yeah, it can look like that. Anybody have that going on at your house? So how do we combat that using human-centered design? We use ideation and lateral thinking. We do concept validation with a lightweight prototype up front. Now, lightweight prototype, not an MVP, not even a piece of production-ready code, can be a drawing on a cocktail napkin, can be a Miro diagram, can be any lightweight way that you can get feedback quickly and inexpensively. And the key point is that it's got to happen early enough so that you can incorporate that learning, right? You've heard a lot of talk about shift left. We want to shift everything left. Well, what we really want to shift left is our learning, because if we can shift that learning left, then our pivots become a lot more powerful.
So we did have one
I will
question.
say,
Is the origins of human-centered design IDEO?
I would
Yeah.
not say that. No, IDEO is famous for popularizing design thinking. I think the term design thinking comes from them. Human-centered design has been around quite a while, and you know the probably the modern biggest popularizers of them of what I think of as human-centered design started with like Jacob Nielsen and Donald Norman, and they now are the principals of the Nielsen Norman group. But I mean, learning from users, we heard about Gemba walks. Like human-centered design is an approach that incorporates a lot of traditions that have happened. I don't know that I could give credit to any particular, one person. I don't even know who coined the term originally.
All right, so what does it look like if your solution is not done right? Well, it can look like that. So what tools does human-centered design have to prevent this? We have solution validation. Well, so solution validation is sort of like concept validation, only it's typically done with higher fidelity or heavier weight prototypes. Could be code. We really like prototypes. An example of this is task completion testing, right? We've built an application that, hey, it's tax time. We've built an application that automates you doing your taxes. Well, a neat thing to do is hang out with users while they use your application and see if they can, in fact, complete the task. And I kind of like the curse to time ratio. I want to judge their frustration. I want to judge, are they able to, in fact, do it? Was it intuitive to them? Did they have to, read the help? Did they have to scratch their heads and figure it out, or did they just know?
For most people, the way that they've encountered this in the past, solution validation, is through usability testing of something that they're getting ready to release. So, whether that's some form of beta testing or other like rolling something out. This is the most frequent way that solution validation is done. Really, at the end of the line, it's meant to catch bugs or something like that. And that's absolutely valid. It's absolutely valuable. But if that is the principal step of feedback, which it often is, you are pretty far down the runway before you can make real course correction changes that might have to do with like core decisions about how a product is designed. So that's how you will be familiar with this. We certainly love usability testing, but it is not the whole of what we are talking about. So this is what this looks like. We now, instead of a double diamond, have roughly 4 diamonds. We have an area where you're looking at the right problem. You're doing your discovery with users. You are identifying problems. You are coming back to them and in some way validating that they actually want these problems solved. You are coming up with a set of solutions. You're doing ideation and concept validation. We've used the term a couple times, lateral thinking, but it's really valuable at this point that when you say, how might we solve this, that you actually have a time set aside to consider different options and opportunities, that you're not just leaping at the first thing. And then you have solution validation. Once you're building and can get to a point of fidelity that you can tell whether users are going to be able to use what you're doing, you are doing solution validation. all the way up until the release, after which hopefully you're doing some kind of evaluation. The point that I would make here is instead of a team-to-team handoff, which is what a double diamond often ends up being, the team is owning the problem, and the junctures of these double diamonds look a lot more like pivot or persevere decisions. You can decide, is this a problem that needs solving upstream? You can decide, is this particular way that we're solving it an effective way to do it? And each time you're trying to shift that decision as early and as inexpensively as possible. The people that brought the Juicero out, that should have probably stopped after discovery, as was well pointed out.
So what value does HCD bring into your Agile process? Well, what we mean is actual interactions with end users. Product owners are great. I love my product owners. I especially love my product owners that are on the line right now, present and past. But sometimes actual end users know things that you may be lost on your product owner. Maybe a detail that's just too in the weeds for your product owner. We want to do this learning also in time to pivot, right? So what that means is we're going to plan this work out a little bit. And we have actually a mechanism for helping you plan out that work. We want to keep you learning as lightweight as possible. And the idea is that we want to base the amount of HCD resources that we allocate to something to its stakes or its risk, right? What are the stakes of this release? What happens if we get it wrong? How bad could it be? Higher the stakes, higher the HCD investment.
So if you look at what we're talking about through the lens, if you're looking at software delivery through the lens of human-centered design, these three phases, the discovery, ideation, and concept validation, roughly lead up to a pivot or persevere decision. And it is more or less linear. You are going to come up with ideas, you're going to test them out. Maybe you find in that concept validation that you need to come back and refine an idea. But you're going to keep going at that until you come up with something that you think is a release candidate. Then once you move into that, you're going to be doing work that looks a lot like probably what most folks here are very familiar with, refinement leading to development, leading to some kind of validation. The step here is that the validation happens before there's a release. You want to make sure that the thing that you are building is done right. This is the done right part of the game. There are always the opportunity for surprises. Every now and then you learn that you missed something upstream. That is okay. That is, again, the part of Agile that is hard to embrace, but is important to embrace. The idea that sometimes you learn that you're just on the wrong track. Hopefully, by the time you get into refinement and development, you know you're on the right track. You have some evidence for it. And now what you're doing is just making sure that you're building the right version of it. So that's a lot of talk about like why we want human-centered Agile, what we think it looks like at a broad level. From here, the natural questions are, how do we actually do this? You know, how do we bring this in to an Agile environment? Joe, this one's you.
Is this you or me? It says you.
That
but I
one's
thought
you.
Okay. So how in fact do we do that? Well, like many things in Agile, it is a mindset, and we want to be mindful that we understand that design mindset, right? That curiosity about what are my end users thinking, right? That wanting to engage with the end user needs to be a holistic team approach, right? That means we don't have a design team and a development team, right? And the design team is going to get their insights and hand it to no, that's not what we're talking about. We want you to look at your roadmaps for risk or try to determine what the stakes of your releases are to help you figure out how much HCD resources you want to apply. And when you do have that figured out, we want you to plan that HCD work using some sort of a tool. Now, we recommend the research roadmap. Your mileage may vary, but we're going to show it to you in a minute and see if it is something that maybe you take back to your teams at your next retro. Hey, we talked about this thing. Would this research roadmap help us plan our research work? I love this. this is yet another of one of the long list of things that Brad has taught me, research stories. All right, so you're probably doing some kind of spikes right now. A research story is similar to a spike. We're going to quantify what we're going to learn, who we're going to learn it from, when we're going to learn it. And we have multiple ingredients for success that we actually made into a whole separate slide that we're going to talk about here coming up.
Yeah. So that first thing, the mind shift of human-centered Agile, what is that mind shift? And it's that it's a holistic process. We say whole team, whole problem, whole outcome. Whether you're thinking in this way or you're thinking of something like outcomes over outputs or escaping the build trap, the idea here is that the team on the ground isn't responsible for delivering a set of shell statements. They're not producing code. They are aimed at an outcome. And when they take on the work, they actually get ownership of the problem, not just the delivery of the expected solution. That means that as they make decisions along the way, they're making those decisions with the outcome that they're trying to generate in mind, not just with a target date or logistic concern in mind. It is simultaneous. The team is both building their runway. They're doing what they need to do in terms of research ahead of what is going to get consumed down the road. And they're also doing their delivery at the same time. This is not a sort of on, off kind of process. It's not a bolt-on process where you just sort of add a discovery in front or add a usability test at the end. It happens throughout the process because we need to keep that human in the frame and because we're checking in at multiple points. And then there's shared learning goals. So being human-centered Agile, that helps teams generate their insights and validate their designs and get faster evaluation. One of the challenges that we often encounter is that product owners will think, oh, you're adding more process, which means you're adding more time. In practice, that's not actually how it works. You are shifting the learning to the left. And hopefully, and often truly, like saving time by not building things that aren't needed or going down a wrong solution path and finding out at the release point this was not the correct solution path, even though the problem was right. And that this, as long as you have enough of a runway for what you're going to do, this can happen while your delivery is maintaining its current rate.
So before I move to the next slide, I want to do a quick time check. I'm showing 12:43. We are a little bit long. We will cut into our Q&A period a little bit. What I'd like to ask is if you've got a question, go ahead and write it down in the chat. That will help us be a little bit more efficient with our questions at the end. And if we don't get to your question, we will reach out to you somehow. We'll get you on LinkedIn or we'll see if Jamie or Jeff has your email address and we'll get with you.
Yep.
Okay, your question.
Yep.
So Joe, this one's you.
No, it's not, but that's okay. I'm happy to do it. So we've talked about
You're right.
we've talked a lot about having this be a whole team approach and how it's not what we're looking for to have a set of designers who do all the design and all of the end user interaction and they kind of give you your user stories or they'll do a handoff to the team. Not what we're looking like. Not what we're looking for. This holistic team that's working with the end users has a better idea of the user's pain points and what it is they're looking for in your solution. I love hypotheses in stories. I especially love them in features. And I love pivoting away from that hypothesis when learning indicates that you're not having the kind of results that you wanted to get. And research and design risks are continually reevaluated based on the stakes or the risk of what it is you're developing. So that wasn't so terrible, was it, Brad?
No, you it's like this.
All right, so we're talking about the roadmap, right? A few slides ago, we said we'd like you to think about looking at your roadmap for risks, for reputational risk, for technical risk. What happens if this deployment goes badly? What happens if I build this feature badly? I'm going to start with evaluation because it's kind of a hot button for me. A lot of teams that I have been on have done stuff, put it in production, and then we don't go back to check that we really did, in fact, deliver the value that we promised that we were going to deliver. Or we didn't check to find out, hey, how is that going? You know, is it going well? Or, you know, sometimes users, you do something really good for them, and what it does is it uncovers other problems that weren't apparent to them previously. So what can happen if I get it wrong? How much HCD can I justify doing, right? Because it's not free. You know, you do have to pay for it. How much do I want to do? And I guess in the beginning, how do we know this is really a problem that our users want to solve? Okay, I get if it's been prioritized by our product owner, they think it's a problem that we should solve, but have we really validated with our users that this reflects
Anji,
their desire? Hey, if
नहीं
you're not
आदि नहीं
present,
आया
could
अभी
you
मेरी
go on mute,
मीटिंग चल
please?
रही है बहुत.
Thank you. All right, so these are the stakes that we're talking about. Here's our friend, looks like he's going to enjoy one. Stakes can include money, stakes can include adoption risks. Even if you build a great solution, I'm kind of living this right now. Even if you build a great solution, sometimes your users are reluctant to adopt it. That's a real problem, and you need to know that up front. Reputation and trust. Sometimes you can do something that's so bad that you don't get a second chance. Well, in that case, the stakes are very high, and I'm going to allocate all sorts of HCD time to it. And team morale is something. So here is an idea for a research story. So here's this feature. Someone has decided we're going to add Bitcoin as a payment method. This is you know, I wonder if we should have changed this feature. This was an example we did for Under Armour. We'll use it anyway. Hey,
I think it's great because it reflects an idea that is clearly of the moment for someone.
Of
And
the moment. Hey, Bitcoin, this is big deal. We want to be able to pay for Bitcoin. Well, in your, you know, in your checkout, in your shopping cart. Well, I just want you to think about this feature and want you to think, have you ever been paying for something and you were bummed that there wasn't a Bitcoin, you know, pay with Bitcoin option? Think about this feature and think about problem validation. Do you think that the team that wrote that did problem validation? Are they solving a problem that their users have, or are they solving a problem that they made up? How did they do ideation? How did they work with users? Did they, you know, do any kind of concept validation at all, much less solution validation? And, you know, how will they evaluate this when they're finished and when it's in? What are the risks? What are the risks of not knowing? How much allocation of HCD resources do you want to make?
So this is a great example. Let me jump into like thinking about this in terms of stakes. I could imagine a case where the answer to most of these questions is not actually terribly, like it's not that big a deal. We have a vendor that's willing to do this. It's inexpensive to do it. The amount of code that gets added to a page is very small. Like the stakes just aren't that high. You know, you could have a plug and play solution. You might decide this doesn't merit that much research. You can just add it to the page and see if you get customers. Or you could at this point understand that the stakes are higher than you think. There's a high licensing or business cost to doing it. There's going to be a lot more work in making and connecting the financial back ends than anyone thought. You know, there's a risk that people's payments don't get processed the way that standard payments right now do, and it interrupts the business loop. Here's a case where you would actually want to walk through this and say, okay, you know, what if we're solving the wrong problem? If the cost is low, that's not a big deal. If the cost is high, that is a big deal. What if we make a tool that doesn't work the way that we think it does? Trust, like what if we're asking for people's banking information or financial information in a way that they're not comfortable with? Those of us that were around in the late 90s and the rise of the web, remember there is a lot of trust issue around payment at the time. Things sometimes work this way. Go ahead, Joe.
So someone asked, this is probably relevant right now, but could this be taken as a business risk? Some payment providers will not allow you to work with them if you accept Bitcoin, for example.
Absolutely. And so like there's the risk, and then what are the stakes of that? Who are those people that might not work with you? What kind of damage is that doing? That one is more of a business risk. It's less of a research, like a UX and research risk that way. But it is a good example of thinking about like, okay, what is the risk that we need to account for? And then what are the stakes of that risk? So with a research story, and remember, we're talking human-centered agile. We're really talking about making sure that we are reflecting the users of the product in our understanding. The value that you're getting out of it is key, just like any other story. And so, like as a team, we want to learn X so that we can decide Y. Like it should be written in a very familiar user story way. And you want to bake in the learning objective. It's not just, we would like to show this to people and get feedback, which as a UX person, we hear that all the time. Okay, what is it that you actually want to learn? Is this a concept validation? Is this like, are you looking for trouble spots at a solution level? And like, what are your learning objectives? What are the decisions that are going to come out of that? And then when you have, like, when you start the story, when you think about delivering it, there is a definition of ready that goes along with it. What is your hypothesis tested? What insights are expected? What is your methodology? You know, how are you actually going to test this? And what is the manner of share out going to be? I won't go too far into this, but you can do attitudinal or behavioral testing. You can do qualitative or quantitative testing. If you have a research team that is empowered, you should be able to ask, like, if we wanted to know this, how would we learn it? And then finally, this is a really big one, is who are we getting and how are we getting them to do this? What is our recruitment approach? Just out of experience, do not take this step lightly. It's just one of those things that recruitment always takes a little more lift than you think it will. So you want to build it into the story right from the beginning. This is where our users are coming from.
All right, our research roadmap. This was generated when Brad and I first started working together, and we got some resistance from Agile teams that didn't like the idea of doing research in one sprint that wasn't going to be consumed in that sprint. It was going to be consumed in the next sprint, or maybe even 2 sprints from now. And they said, hey, you know, that's not Agile. What happens if requirements change? And we said, yeah, well, look, we're building big stuff, and the stakes of us getting it wrong are high. So maybe it makes some sense for us to plan out the learning that we want to do. We know that we're going to build something. Let's just make sure that we're building the right thing. And this kind of this visual tool to put your research stories on there and kind of plan them out in advance can be that thing that gives your teams permission to plan a little bit of research. And we found that it was very helpful.
The one thing that it does require, just to go back to that, is it does require a stable backlog. You do need to actually be able to say at an epic or feature level, like with some predictability, this is what's coming up, so that when you do a risk and stakes analysis and link research to it, that like you can predictably assume. Now you don't necessarily need a huge long runway. Things change. This is still Agile. You still adjust to new realities as they happen. But you do need to have some visibility into you know the near and midterm horizon to be able to do this. And our last really big slide here, we are wrapping up, is that there are just some really common ingredients for success when you're trying to integrate HCD and Agile together. And the first, we've shouted out some of our favorite product owners, but an engaged product owner. Teams, and this is true at an Agile level, not just at a human-centered Agile level, teams really struggle with walk-away product owners, with people that say, like, here's my intention, make it happen, and then, you know, isn't there to actually help guide and steer and make decisions as changes happen. You need access to users. It's right there in the humans in human-centered Agile. You need to talk to them. You need some measurement of user outcomes. So we talk about this being outcome, not output. Like you actually need some North Stars to know, like how well is this performing? Are we accomplishing what we mean to accomplish? You need some HCD and team integration. often this can look like UX people embedded on teams. Sometimes it can look like service desks that are linked at a frequent enough frequency that the team is expected to and can use them for all of the major steps. Time to incorporate findings and insights. I cannot tell you how many times the idea was that the research will be done here, and then the development starts the next day, and the release is like a week later. And that's like, you need to be planning your research far enough up your runway that you can make adjustments and course corrections. And finally, you need permission to fail. You need permission to learn that pivot or persevere decision actually matters. Because if you're not going to take your findings and you're not going to be able to act on them, then you have defeated the purpose of doing the research to begin with. We do have a slide here on scaling up. I think based on time, we're probably going to slide past it. It's in our book. We talk a lot about scale.
We do. We have a whole section. Section 5 is on scaling up and how do you do this with multiple teams, and how do you make sure that your learning is informing your strategy. These are some of the, we call it our trophy case of ideas. So some of the things that you are going to need to be successful with human-centered agile. And
so we do have a couple of questions. Not many. They've kind of been answered as we've gone along. One is mine. Will you be able to make the slide deck available for me to send out to these folks afterwards?
Absolutely.
That would be great. All right, thank you for that. And then Katrina has a question. She wants to know, when does writing and communicating business outcomes and metrics that prove the team have achieved the business outcomes occur in the process that you're presenting? When does that happen?
That's a good question, and I think the
great question. I love
has born from someone who has done this before.
So there's two places where this really happens. The first is at the outset, as part of problem definition. You really want to be thinking about what are your success metrics looking like at the end. You want to be able to walk into what you're doing saying, how will we know that we have done a good version of this or a poor version of this or something that requires improvement. So you want to set your North Star metrics and maybe your signal metrics, and we do talk about those in the book. You want to set those up front, and then you want to make sure in the evaluation step that you're able to track and trace those. Now, the stuff that you're doing in between, those are all much more alignment activities. They are not actually proof of, they are validating your concept, they are validating your solution, but they are not proof of impact, which is what happens at evaluation.
That answer your question?
All right.
If not, let us know.
Looks like we maybe stop the share so we could see people's faces here.
And yes, Katrina says thank you.
Well, wow, thanks, Brad and Joe. Thank you so much for coming today. And